What would you do if you were denied a glass of water, not because there wasn't any, but because you didn't look like someone who deserved it? Karen Blake sat quietly in the front row of first class, her posture poised, her presence understated. She wore a deep navy blazer, slacks pressed to perfection, and small pearl earrings that didn't shimmer so much as they spoke. Calm, capable, dignified. Her silver-streaked hair was pinned back in a low bun. She looked like someone used to holding power, but not flaunting it. She didn't need to. To most passengers, she was just another traveler, maybe someone's retired professor or a business executive on the move. No one knew she was a federal judge. No one knew she was set to deliver a keynote the next morning on silent authority, the power of presence in divided spaces. No one knew she'd spent a lifetime holding systems accountable without ever raising her voice. The boarding process dragged on. Karen flipped through the final draft of her speech, handwritten notes lining the margins. Her throat was dry from the morning rush. No time for breakfast, let alone a water bottle. She reached up and pressed the call button. A few moments later, a flight attendant approached. Blonde curls pinned into a neat twist, name tag reading Mara, smile tight and practiced. But when her eyes landed on Karen, the smile didn't reach her eyes. She didn't greet her. She didn't ask what she needed. She just stood there, as if waiting for Karen to justify her existence in that seat. Karen spoke gently, without assumption. "Could I please have a bottle of water?" Mara folded her arms. "Water service hasn't started yet." "I understand," Karen replied, still composed. "It's just, my throat's a bit dry, if it's not too much trouble." "Ma'am," Mara cut in, louder this time. Eyes turned from nearby rows. "We haven't started yet. You'll have to wait until we're in the air." There was no reason to raise her voice. Not over water, not over her. Karen nodded lightly. "I didn't mean to be difficult." Mara didn't respond. She stood a second longer, her silence heavy, then turned and walked away. Karen didn't look around. She didn't need to. She felt it, the shift in the air, the judgment, the unspoken narrative. She must have done something. That part hurt more than the water ever could. Not one person said a word. Not one person asked why she'd been spoken to like that. Karen reached into her handbag, pulled out her phone, and typed a message. Denied water in first class. Loud, intentional. Not surprised, still disappointed. "Please notify Thomas." She hit send. Thomas Langston wasn't just the CEO of the airline. He was an old friend. Someone who knew exactly what kind of woman sat in 2B and how dangerous it could be to underestimate her. Karen didn't raise her voice. She didn't call over a supervisor. She didn't ask for justice out loud. She made a single call, and that call was about to change everything. In the galley, Mara leaned back against the metal counter, her arms folded tight across her chest, her jaw clenched just enough to show she was still irritated. Beside her, a younger flight attendant named Julia quietly organized beverage trays. "She already hit the call button before we even finished boarding," Mara said with a scoff. "Like she owns the place." Julia didn't look up. "Did she say something rude?" Mara rolled her eyes. "It's not what she said, it's how she said it. You can always tell when someone thinks they deserve special treatment." Julia stayed silent, carefully aligning the water bottles. She'd worked enough flights to recognize when something wasn't just about procedure. "Sometimes," she said softly, "being kind doesn't cost anything." Mara raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. She went back to checking the drink list, her movements sharp, almost defensive. Back in seat 2B, Karen sat motionless, her phone now tucked away, her folder open once again on her lap. She wasn't reading. Her eyes scanned the page, but her mind was elsewhere, retracing every word, every glance, the volume of Mara's voice. It wasn't about the water. It was about the message behind the refusal. "You don't belong here." She'd been through this before. In boardrooms, in courtrooms, in the security line, sometimes subtle, sometimes loud, always there, always heavy. But this time, something felt different. Her phone buzzed gently in the armrest. She glanced down. "Thomas Langston, what happened? Tell me everything. Flight number?" Karen typed quickly. "Flight 747 to Boston. Denied water in first class." Loud, public, not new, but this one felt different. I stayed calm. A pause, then another vibration. "Sit tight. I'll handle it." Karen read it twice, then locked the screen. She folded her hands calmly over her folder. She knew what that meant. Thomas wasn't the type to send emails. He didn't delegate this kind of thing. If he said, "I'll handle it," it meant he was coming. The seatbelt sign lit up above her. The captain's voice came through the intercom with the usual announcements. Calm, rehearsed, routine. But nothing about this flight would be routine from this moment on. 20 minutes into the air, the drink service began. Mara rolled the cart forward with robotic precision, her fake smile back in place. She offered wine, sparkling water, soda. She laughed lightly with a businessman in a gray blazer, complimented a woman's scarf, exchanged pleasantries with a teenage girl. But when she reached row 2B, her smile faltered. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked without making eye contact. Karen looked at the tray. Still no water. Even though it was there, rows of bottles lined in full view. Mara caught herself. "Of course, I meant to offer earlier." She reached for a bottle, poured it into a plastic cup, and set it down gently on Karen's tray. She moved to the next seat before Karen could respond. The damage was done, and Mara knew it, but she didn't know how much. In the cockpit, the in-flight phone rang. The captain answered. His face changed almost instantly. "Yes, sir?" he said into the receiver. Understood. He listened a few more seconds, then ended the call without further word. Beside him, a small screen mounted to the control panel lit up with a secure video link. On the screen, Thomas Langston, the CEO of the airline, live, mid-flight, watching. The galley felt colder now. Mara stood still for a long second, one hand resting on the edge of the counter. Her face was pale beneath the flush of tension. "That was the captain," she said flatly. Julia turned. "Why? What did he say?" Mara didn't answer right away. She straightened her uniform jacket, pulled her shoulders back, and walked away with clipped steps, faster than before. She didn't need to guess. She knew. Inside the cockpit, the captain waited in silence as Mara entered. On the wall beside the flight panel, the secure screen still glowed with the live feed. Thomas Langston sat calmly in a dark suit, a crest of the airline shimmering behind him. His expression unreadable. But his eyes, cold, clear, had no need for drama. "Mara," the captain said, barely turning his head, "please explain what happened with the passenger in seat 2B. Mara's mouth opened, but her voice stumbled out defensive and hollow. "She asked for water before service began. I told her we hadn't started yet. That's protocol." Thomas spoke then. Not loud, not angry, but with a sharpness that cut through every layer of practiced professionalism. "Is it also protocol to raise your voice at a passenger for asking a basic courtesy?" Mara's throat tightened. I didn't mean. "You didn't mean for it to sound that way," Thomas said, finishing her sentence. "But it did. Loudly, publicly." He leaned forward slightly on screen. "The passenger you dismissed is Judge Karen Blake, a federal judge, a keynote speaker, and more importantly, someone who deserved respect whether you knew her title or not." The cockpit went still. The hum of the engine outside was the only sound. Mara's lips parted again, another excuse forming. Thomas raised a single finger. "Not to her, to the room, to the moment. We're not here to argue what happened. We're here to fix it." He looked to the captain. "Upon landing, seat 2B is to disembark first. A car will be waiting. I'll be there myself." He turned back to Mara. "In the meantime, you will issue an apology, publicly, clearly, no excuses." Then the screen went black. Mara stood frozen, alone with the reflection of her own posture in the dim glass. She hadn't just been corrected. She'd been exposed. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel in control. Back in seat 2B, Karen took a quiet sip of water. Her face unreadable. She hadn't made a scene. She hadn't demanded a thing. But the cabin had shifted. The silence had weight now. People noticed her. Some with guilt, some with confusion, most with discomfort they couldn't name. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. The reckoning had already begun, and it would land long before the plane touched down. The cart had stopped rolling, the drinks were served, but the air inside first class wasn't the same. People sat straighter now. Eyes flickered more. Pages stopped turning, fingers hovered over screen edges. The silence had changed, from passive to aware. Mara stood just outside the curtain that separated the galley from the front cabin. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her blazer. Her smile, once automatic, was gone. This wasn't protocol anymore. This was something else. She stepped forward. She walked the aisle slower than before, not with grace, but with caution. And when she reached row 2B, she paused. Karen didn't look up. She turned a page in her notes. circled a sentence softly with a pen, then finally lifted her eyes. They met Mara's. There was no fire in Karen's gaze, no triumph, just the kind of stillness that made people realize how much noise they carried. Mara swallowed. "Judge Blake," she began. Her voice was softer than it had been all day. "I want to apologize for earlier. I misjudged the situation. I handled it poorly. I'm sorry if I caused any discomfort." It sounded rehearsed. It was rehearsed. Karen's response was quiet, measured, but every word landed like truth slipping under a locked door. "You didn't misjudge the situation," she said. "You misjudged me." Mara flinched, but she didn't move. "I asked for water," Karen continued, "and you made a decision about who I was, based on who you thought I shouldn't be." A man across the aisle lowered his tablet. Another woman, 2 rows back, tilted her head slightly, listening. Karen's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I've flown this airline for 15 years, she said. "Coach, business, first. I've seen how you treat people when no one's watching." Mara's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, then stopped. Karen lifted a hand, just slightly. "Just enough." "I'm not interested in scripted lines," she said. "If you're sorry, fine. But let's be honest, what you did wasn't a misunderstanding." Her eyes didn't waver. It was a choice. The words hung between them, quiet, unshakable. Karen picked up her water again and took a slow sip. "You can go now." Mara stood still, her face flushed, her hands twitching at her sides. She turned without a word and walked back down the aisle. But she didn't walk the same. Her steps no longer carried authority, only the weight of consequence. Back in the galley, Julia had heard every word. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. Meanwhile, Karen returned to her notes, but she wasn't reading. Her mind had moved elsewhere. Her thoughts weren't bitter. They were clear. The apology, shallow as it was, had been public. That mattered. Because now everyone had seen it, and they'd have to live with what they saw. The seatbelt sign blinked on. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." His tone was calm, but beneath it, something had shifted. At the front of the cockpit, the captain tapped in a final set of priority codes. On his screen, a new message appeared, clear and short. "CEO Thomas Langston will meet Flight 747 at Gate 18. Passenger in Seat 2B is to deplane first. Ground security has been alerted." The captain glanced at the manifest. "Row 2B, Judge Karen Blake." He exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a customer service issue anymore. This was policy level, system level. Back in the cabin, the mood had curdled, not into chaos, not into noise, into stillness. The kind of stillness that forces people to confront what they didn't say earlier. A man across the aisle tapped his fingers nervously on the armrest. A couple whispered in hushed tones, their eyes flicking between Karen and the galley curtain. Karen remained still, composed. She adjusted the strap of her bag, closed her folder, tucked it neatly into her handbag. She didn't glance around, but she felt it. The weight was no longer on her. It was in the air, in the glances. In the silence of those who'd said nothing when it counted. In the galley, Mara hadn't returned since the apology. She stood behind the curtain, staring at the metal counter, pretending to organize supplies that didn't need organizing. She wasn't angry anymore. She was afraid. She had already received a second message from the cockpit. "Prepare to disembark separately. Report to Gate 18 Lounge upon landing. CEO on site." She'd worked 12 years in the sky. She'd seen her share of complaints, some written, some shrugged off. But never like this. Not face to face with the man who ran the entire airline. She leaned forward, both hands braced on the counter. Julia, arms crossed, finally broke the silence. "You could have just brought her a bottle of water." Mara didn't answer. She started to, then stopped, because that was the problem. She had made a choice, and now she couldn't outrun it. At that very moment, Karen's phone buzzed once more. A quiet message on the screen. "Thomas Langston, we're parked at Gate 18. I'll be there when the doors open. You'll be the first to exit. Just so you know, there will be press." Karen read it twice. She didn't want headlines. She didn't need applause. But if attention was what it took to make someone like Mara think twice the next time, then let them watch. All of them. The wheels touched the runway with a soft bump. The cabin jolted slightly. No one clapped. No one cheered. The only sound was the hush that follows realization. The kind that doesn't end when the plane lands. The kind that begins. The plane came to a smooth halt at gate 18. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Normally, this would be the moment of chaos, passengers leaping to their feet, overhead bins clicking open, calls made, connections rushed. But not today. Today, first class remained seated. Still. Watching. Two uniformed crew members stepped into the cabin, standing by the forward exit. Their movements were practiced, but their posture said something different. Formality. Preparation. Julia approached quietly, eyes on Karen. "They're asking for 2B to deplane first," she whispered. Mara stood behind her, arms stiff at her sides. No clipboard, no eye contact. Karen unbuckled her seatbelt. She didn't rush. She stood slowly, adjusted her blazer, and lifted her bag over her shoulder, with the calm, graceful rhythm of someone who had done this 1,000 times. But never like this. She walked down the aisle. She didn't glance left or right. She didn't need to. The silence behind her said enough. Guilt isn't always loud. Sometimes it just sits there, in the seats of people who chose comfort over conscience. Outside the plane, the jet bridge had fallen still. No carts, no chatter, just presence. At the center of it all stood Thomas Langston, tall, composed, and waiting. Karen stepped through the cabin door into the tunnel of muted metal and worn carpet. Thomas took a single step forward, nodded once, "Welcome home." He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. The moment was short, but everyone would remember it. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Behind Karen, the cabin remained frozen. Not out of confusion, but recognition. That woman in seat 2B had been treated like an inconvenience. And now the CEO of the airline had just personally welcomed her off the plane like she ran the runway. Because in that moment, she did. Back inside the aircraft, Mara stayed in the galley, her back to the cabin, staring at a plastic cup half full of water. She hadn't moved since Karen stepped off. Her ears burned, her throat tightened. 12 years in the air, and this was the moment that undid everything she thought she understood about power, presence, and judgment. She had made people cry before, roll their eyes, even send complaint emails. But she had never made the whole plane sit still in collective shame. She had never been watched so quietly, so completely. Minutes later, a calm but professional voice echoed through the front cabin. "Miss Jennings, please step off the aircraft. You're being requested at the terminal lounge by Mr. Langston." Passengers turned their heads subtly. Some lifted phones, not to record, but to pretend they weren't watching. Mara's shoes clicked louder than ever as she walked the aisle. Julia stood near the galley curtain. She didn't smirk. She didn't speak, she just watched. And in that watching, Mara felt something she hadn't in years. Not humiliation. Consequence. Mara stepped off the plane and into the terminal lounge expecting a closed-door conversation, a slap on the wrist, maybe a form to sign. Instead, she walked into a room lit by soft overhead lights and flanked by silence. At the center sat Thomas Langston. Not behind a desk, not behind security. Just there. Present. Beside him, seated in stillness, was Karen. She didn't look over when Mara entered. She didn't need to. Mara's steps faltered as she crossed the room. "Miss Jennings," Thomas said, voice cold, controlled. "Take a seat." She obeyed. She folded her hands tightly in her lap. Not for show, for anchor. Thomas opened a slim folder in front of him. No dramatic slams, no theatrics, just documentation. Precise. Quiet. "You denied a basic courtesy," he said, then escalated a simple request into public humiliation, and even after being told who you were speaking to, your apology failed to address what you did. Mara opened her mouth. He raised a finger, firm, not rude. "Don't defend, just listen." He turned to Karen. "Judge Blake, if you're willing, I'd like to offer her the opportunity to hear you, fully, without rebuttal." Karen didn't hesitate. She turned to face Mara directly. Her voice was low, even. Every word exact. "I asked for water. You looked at me and decided I didn't belong." Mara blinked hard. That wasn't a mistake. That was a decision. A choice shaped by bias you've never been asked to confront. Karen paused. Not to let it sink in, but to let it burn slow. "I've written laws to protect people from decisions like yours, but no law can change the way people think. Only consequences can do that." The room stayed still. Thomas nodded once. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending full board review." You will not return to active duty until this review is complete, and if retained in any capacity, it will be conditional upon the successful completion of a restorative accountability program, not policy training. Real work, human work. Mara nodded. Slowly. Eyes glassed but dry, she stood. No protest, no exit line. She walked out of the room carrying nothing but the weight of being seen for what she did and what she didn't. Karen stayed seated. Thomas glanced at her, quiet. Would you like us to release a statement? Karen shook her head. Let the silence speak. They'll remember more that way. And she was right. Because what had happened wasn't about who she was. It was about who everyone in that cabin chose not to be when it mattered. The headlines arrived before Karen even reached her hotel. Federal judge removed from first class over water request. CEO responds in person. Passenger silence questioned after onboard incident. Flight 747, a glass of water and a national reckoning. No interviews were given, no public statement from Karen, and yet the story spread like fire. But it wasn't flames that carried it. It was shame and recognition. Social media lit up with hashtags. Judge Blake, airline bias, the water was never the point. Stories poured in. Quiet ones, familiar ones. I asked for help and got ignored. I was told to wait when others were served. I wore a hoodie in business class and got asked for my boarding pass twice. Karen didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because for once, the silence wasn't hers to hold. Inside the airline's headquarters, Thomas Langston stood before the board that same night. He didn't open with numbers. He opened with the truth. This is not a PR issue. This is a values issue. He held up the report on Mara Jennings. Not just the incident, but a history of small infractions. Things brushed off as attitude, stress, or personality. Our policy says first class is first class. No judgment, no difference. But policies mean nothing when culture looks the other way. A VP raised a hand. Should we issue a public apology? Thomas shook his head. Not yet. Because this isn't about saving face, it's about earning trust. Meanwhile, across the city, Karen sat alone in her apartment, a cup of tea cooling beside her. She didn't check the news. She didn't open her inbox, now flooded with press requests, panel invitations, messages from colleagues and strangers alike. She sat with a single thought. They saw it, and they didn't look away this time. Her assistant, Lee, called just after 8 p.m. They want to use your speech, the one on courtroom bias, as a case study. Karen raised an eyebrow. The one I never got to deliver? Exactly, because apparently you lived it at 30,000 feet. Karen allowed herself a quiet smile. Funny how life doesn't wait for a podium. Back at the airline, changes had already begun. Training manuals rewritten, live scenario testing introduced. A new internal task force, passenger equity and conduct oversight, was formed. No press release, no grand announcement, just action. Because as Thomas Langston told his executive team, if we're doing it for the headlines, then we're not doing it for the right reasons. And as for Mara, she sat in her small apartment, her crew badge now resting in a drawer, untouched, no longer employed, but not untethered. She stared at a blank page for hours, unsure what to write. Then finally, with hands shaking but honest, she began. I failed you, not because I didn't follow the rules, but because I followed them without thought, without heart. The letter wasn't for the airline, not even for Karen, it was for herself. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Tucked between reports, court notices, and a glossy magazine bearing her face on the cover, no return address. Just her name in careful handwriting. Judge Karen Blake. Karen didn't open it right away. She rarely did with mail like that. Most were formalities, invitations, sometimes praise, often performance. But this one felt, still, heavy in a different way. She sat in her quiet study, the city stretching beneath her window, and slowly unfolded the letter. It was from Mara, not typed, not polished, just written, honestly, nakedly. I failed you. Not with a mistake, but with a mindset I never questioned. You didn't need water, you needed to be seen. And I didn't see you. Karen closed her eyes for a moment. She'd read thousands of apologies in her life, on the record, under oath, in public courtrooms. This wasn't one of those. This wasn't for show. It was a mirror. 3 days later, she stood before a packed auditorium. Not at a courthouse, not at a political gala, at a university legal ethics symposium. The topic? Power without volume, moral courage in public space. She didn't bring a speech. She didn't need to. I didn't raise my voice, she said, her hands open, steady. But I also didn't shrink. I didn't ask for headlines. I asked for water, and someone decided I wasn't worth that. She paused, letting the silence settle, again, but in a new room. The most dangerous kind of injustice is the kind no one thinks is injustice at all, the kind people excuse as policy, the kind that passes for normal until it doesn't. Her voice dropped slightly, intimate now. Your job, if you choose law or government or leadership, isn't to scream louder than injustice. It's to stand so still, so firm that it can't pass by you unnoticed. A soft murmur of agreement passed through the crowd. Some students looked down, scribbling. Others didn't move at all. Karen's final words weren't grand. They weren't rehearsed. The most important law you'll ever enforce, she said, is the one you write inside yourself, and the day you choose not to enforce it, someone else will pay the price. She walked off stage to silence. Then a standing ovation, not for drama, for clarity. That night, back at home, she tucked Mara's letter into a slim folder in her desk drawer, a file marked unfinished work. Inside were only a few other items: her father's note when she passed the bar, a woman's letter from a wrongful conviction she'd helped overturn, a child's drawing from a custody case she'd refused to rush. Now, Mara's apology. She didn't keep it to forgive her. She kept it because it meant something, a beginning. At the airline, flight attendant training now begins with a case study titled Flight 747. It doesn't start with the headline, it starts with the water, and the silence, and what came next. If this story moved you, comment below. Have you ever been judged before you spoke a word? Share this video. Someone out there needs to see what quiet power looks like. And if you believe in stories that create change, subscribe to our channel and hit the T so you never miss what comes next. Because here at Aiva Stories, we don't just tell what happened, we show you why it mattered. And sometimes, the loudest voice is the one that never had to shout.